facing down a leaky faucet, trying to understand a complicated lease full of jargon, or maybe the worst one, getting that official notice that your rent is going up, and you need to talk about it in English. Welcome to Daily English Practice. Listen and speak. Navigating where you live, talking about rent, dealing with landlords. It's a fundamental, sometimes stressful part of life, right? And doing it in English can definitely add, well, an extra layer of challenge. But here's the good news. You don't have to feel lost. That's why we're doing a deep dive into exactly this topic, the English you need to talk confidently about housing and renting.
Absolutely. Whether you're just starting your search, need to report a repair, or maybe have to tackle a difficult conversation about your rent, having the right language and understanding the key concepts, it makes all the difference.
It really does. And for this deep dive, we haven't just picked one source. We've pulled together insights from a whole stack. Articles specifically designed for language learners with real-life role-play scenarios, guides on deciphering lease agreements, practical tips for negotiating rent increases.
Yeah, and we've even looked at a real-world online discussion where people were sharing their experiences and, the language they used around rising rents.
Right. So we've got a good mix.
Our mission here is basically to extract the most useful, practical language and the absolute key concepts from all these different sources.
Think of this as your essential toolkit.
Exactly. A shortcut, hopefully, to confidently handle the most common housing conversations you'll probably encounter in English.
Okay, let's jump right in then. We'll start at the beginning with the absolute basics, finding and asking about a potential new place.
Right. So at the core of it is the relationship between the person who owns the property, that's the landlord, and the person who pays to live there.
The tenant or renter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our sources immediately highlight some fundamental vocabulary you're going to need, from day one.
Okay, like a...
Well, obviously, there's rent itself, the money you pay regularly, usually monthly.
Sure.
Then, critically, there's the lease, or sometimes called a tenancy agreement. This is the big one. It's the legally binding document.
That's your contract, basically. The rule book for living there.
Precisely. It lays out everyone's rights and responsibilities. You'll also encounter the security deposit, often just called the deposit.
That upfront money.
Yeah, money paid up front, held by the landlord, kind of like insurance against potential damage or if you leave owing rent. Utilities are key too.
Oh yeah, like water, electricity.
Water, electricity, gas, these services. You absolutely need to know which are included in the rent or if you'll be paying for them separately.
Big budget difference there.
Huge. Then, when you find a place you're interested in seeing, you'll arrange a viewing or a showing.
Right, to go see it in person.
And if you ever decide to move out, you'll need to give notice. According to the notice period specified in your lease, that's how much time you have to tell the landlord you're leaving.
Okay.
And finally, maintenance. This just refers to keeping the property in good repair. If something breaks, it needs maintenance.
Got it. So with that essential vocabulary in hand, let's walk through those initial conversations. You've seen an ad online or maybe in a window, and you want to inquire.
Yeah. What do you say?
Well, one simple, clear way to start, straight from our sources, is something like, "Hello, my name is your name. I saw your advertisement for a room house apartment for rent, and I'm very interested."
Nice and direct. Polite. Then you need to ask the crucial availability and detail questions, like,
Real.
Is the apartment available now? Or when will it be available? Are pretty necessary. You'll also need to ask about the size or layout. How many rooms does it have? Maybe is it a one-bedroom or a studio?
Practical questions like parking are important too, right? Is there a parking space included? Or maybe is parking available nearby?
Definitely. And of course, you need to see the place. Can I visit to see it? Or perhaps more formally, is it possible to schedule a viewing?
Okay, so scheduling that viewing is the next step.
Yep. You'll likely ask, when would it be convenient for me to view the apartment? And you should be prepared to state when you are free.
Right, you might say.
You might say you're available after 6 o'clock on weekdays, or at weekends, or even mention a specific time, like in my lunch break between 12 and 2 p.m., something like that.
And always good to confirm, I guess.
Well, absolutely. Confirm the details. Okay, so that's Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. Great. I look forward to meeting you. Avoids confusion.
Right. Now, during the viewing itself, the conversation gets more specific, especially about, well, money and what's included. The number in question probably is, how much is the rent per month?
Absolutely essential. But don't stop there. Clarify what that rent actually covers. Does the rent include water and electricity? Or maybe are utilities separate?
Because that can significantly change your budget, as you said.
Exactly. And don't forget the deposit. Is there a security deposit and how much is it? Also clarify payment terms. Can I pay the rent monthly, or do you require payment yearly?
I saw some sources mention landlords might offer a discount for paying several months upfront.
Yeah, sometimes. It doesn't hurt to ask, maybe later in the negotiation, but first, just understand the standard terms.
Okay. The language learner sources we looked at listed a really good, comprehensive set of other questions you might ask during a viewing, too.
Oh, yeah. Like what else?
Things like confirming costs again.
Mm-hmm.
Does the rent include the costs for water and heating?
Yeah.
Or checking on connectivity. Is there a telephone connection? I need to be able to get internet access, practical stuff.
Good ones. Knowing about the building itself and the neighbors is also key for deciding if it's a good fit. How many other rooms are let in the building? Or if it's a shared place, how many people share the bathroom or the kitchen?
Yeah, and don't be shy about asking about amenities, right? Is there a laundry room on site? Or is there a washing machine or dishwasher in the kitchen?
Definitely ask about those. You can also ask about the layout using terms like studio apartment, which usually means one main open plan area for living, sleeping, and cooking.
Versus a place with a separate bedroom.
Exactly. And sources even suggest asking about who else lives there. Do any of the other tenants have children? Or if you can personalize the space a bit. Am I allowed to redecorate the rooms?
That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought to ask about redecorating up front.
Well, better to know the rules. These questions, pulled from the sources, give you a really solid foundation for understanding the place and talking about it. And always confirm the duration. How long is the rental lease for? And the practical details. When would I be able to move in?
Right. So, okay. Fast forward, you've successfully found a place, signed the lease, moved in. But then life happens. Things break or issues arise.
Yeah.
Being able to report these problems clearly and politely in English is a crucial skill.
It really is. And our sources give clear examples of language for explaining what's wrong. You can start simply, I'm having a problem with, and then name the item. Or state directly, the heating washing machine, etc. isn't working.
Okay.
Simple enough. If it's something like a key or lock issue, you might say, I'm having a problem with my key and lock the key won't turn easily. Just describe what's happening.
And it's also helpful to explain the consequence of the problem, right? Not just the problem itself.
That's a great point, yes. If a pipe is leaking, you wouldn't just say the sink is leaking, but add something like it is making the floor wet. This gives the landlord a better sense of the urgency or the potential damage.
Makes sense. So you explain the problem, the consequence, then what?
Then you need to politely request action. The key phrase is something like, could you organize for it to be repaired, please? Or maybe more directly, could you please send someone to fix it?
Okay. What about issues with neighbors? Noise seems like a really common one.
Ah, yes, neighbor issues. They require a bit more of a delicate approach, usually. You can phrase it politely, I'm having to complain about the neighbors upstairs, and then explain the issue clearly but calmly. They are very noisy, or be more specific, they are very noisy after 11 p.m. It's about stating the fact of the disturbance without being overly aggressive. Other common issues in shared buildings might involve common areas. Sources mentioned examples like if neighbors leave their garbage in the hallway, which leaves an unpleasant smell, or maybe they leave bicycles in the hallway and it is difficult to open the door.
Right. Things blocking access or making a mess.
Yeah.
And how do you ask the landlord or the building manager to step in?
You can politely request they verify the situation themselves. Could you come and look at the problems for yourself? And then ask for their help in resolving it. And speak to them, please. This shows you're serious and you want them to see what's happening.
Got it. Utilities can also be a source of conversation even after you move in, right?
Definitely. You might need to ask clarifying questions again. Which utilities are included in the rent? Maybe you forgot or it wasn't clear. Or who provides the electricity gas if you need to set up your own account?
Had to pay bills?
Exactly. Where do I pay the water bill? Or maybe get an idea of costs if they're variable. What's the average cost for winter heating? These conversations are just crucial for managing your living costs and responsibilities day to day.
Okay, so moving beyond those daily issues, there's one document that really underpins everything we've discussed. The lease agreement.
Ah, the lease, yes. This document is absolutely foundational. Our sources universally emphasize that a lease is a binding contract.
Meaning it's serious, legal.
Very much so. It's a legal document that clearly outlines the rights and responsibilities of both the tenant and the landlord. Understanding it protects everyone involved.
It's not just a piece of paper you sign and forget. It's really the rule book for your tenancy. So what are the key sections or terms that the sources highlight as essential to understand?
Well, our sources break down several critical clauses. First, just the overall terms of the lease. This covers all your legal obligations, things like when rent is due, rules about pets, guests, noise, your responsibilities for property care.
All the rules.
Yeah, and it also covers the landlord's obligations too, like maintaining the property. Then there's the length of time. This is a really crucial distinction you need to catch.
Oh.
Is it a fixed-term lease, meaning it's for a specific set period, usually a year? Or is it a month-to-month arrangement, sometimes just called a rental agreement?
Okay, what's the practical difference for the tenant there?
Well, a fixed-term lease generally provides stability. Your rent and the terms are usually locked in for that whole period. A month-to-month arrangement offers more flexibility. Either you or the landlord can typically end the agreement or change the terms with much shorter notice, often just 30 days, though that can vary by location. Sources really stress understanding which type you're signing.
Right, stability versus flexibility. Makes sense.
Yeah.
What else?
Next is the monthly rent clause. Seems obvious, right? But it's not just the amount. This clause should specify the exact amount, the due date, the acceptable payment methods.
Pocket pay, yeah.
Exactly. And importantly, it often contains conditions under which the rent could potentially increase, especially when it's time to renew the lease.
That potential for increase is definitely something everyone needs to be aware of right from the start.
Absolutely. Then the security deposit clause. This details the exact amount you paid, the specific conditions under which it will be returned to you at the end, and importantly, the reasons why a landlord might keep part or all of it.
Like damage.
Damage beyond normal wear and tear, or if you owe unpaid rent. Sources highlight that disputes over deposit returns are unfortunately common, so understanding this clause before you sign is vital.
Good advice. What about pets?
If you have pets, or might get one, pay super close attention to the pet policy. This clause lists any restrictions, maybe type, size, or breed of animal, and outlines any extra fees, like a separate pet deposit or even ongoing pet rent added to your monthly payment.
And renter's insurance. I feel like that's mentioned more often now.
Yes, many leases now include a renter's insurance clause. If it's required, this insurance protects your personal belongings against things like theft or fire, and it also provides liability coverage if someone gets injured in your apartment.
Okay.
Another clause you might see, especially if maybe your credit or income is borderline, is the guarantor or cosigner clause. That's where someone else, maybe a parent or relative, legally agrees to be financially responsible if you fail to pay rent or cause damages. They essentially co-sign the lease with you.
So they're legally backing you up on the lease. Wow.
Precisely. Two final critical clauses often mentioned are early termination and subletting assignment.
Okay, break those down.
Early termination outlines the conditions and potential penalties like fees if you need to break the lease and move out before the official end date. Life happens. Sometimes you have to move unexpectedly.
Right. And subletting.
Subletting and assignment rules specify whether you are allowed to rent out your apartment to someone else while you're still on the lease that's subletting, or transfer the lease entirely to a new person that's assignment. And it details the conditions under which the landlord might permit this, if at all.
Lots of rules there, too.
Definitely. Then there are the renewal terms. How does the lease continue after the initial period? Does it automatically convert to month? Do you need to sign a whole new fixed-term lease? And crucially, what changes, like a rent increase, might happen upon renewal?
And lastly, late payment fees. This details any charges if your rent is paid after the due date, and usually includes a grace period a few days after the due date before the fee kicks in.
Wow. That really underscores why taking the time to read and, more importantly, understand every single clause in that document is so critical before you put pen to paper.
Absolutely critical.
The sources also briefly cover your basic responsibilities as a tenant. Things like paying rent on time, keeping the property reasonably clean and undamaged, following the rules set out in the lease, and notifying the landlord promptly of any needed repairs.
And balanced against that are the landlord's corresponding rights.
Mm-hmm.
The right to receive the rent, the right to inspect the property, usually with proper notice given to you, the right to enforce the terms of the lease, and, under specific conditions and following local laws carefully, the right to evict a tenant if they seriously violate the lease.
Which brings us to a topic that's often a source of stress, I think. Discussing and negotiating rent, especially when you're facing an increase. Yeah, it's definitely a sensitive conversation. But sources like Legal Shield emphasize that as a tenant, you absolutely have the right to ask to discuss the rent price with your landlord. Now, they aren't always obligated to negotiate, but presenting a case thoughtfully can sometimes be effective.
Okay, so how do you approach that conversation, particularly about a rent increase, to have the best chance?
Preparation is absolutely key. Sources strongly recommend you start by doing some research. Is the proposed increase actually fair? Look at comparable rental prices in your immediate local area. What are similar apartments renting for right now? Are other landlords raising rents by similar amounts nearby?
So get some data.
Exactly. Bring facts and examples from your research to the landlord. The advice is consistently to approach them calmly and respectfully. Avoid getting emotional or confrontational, even if you're upset. Focus on the data and, importantly, your history as a tenant.
Leveraging your history as a good tenant. That's a strategic point from the sources, isn't it? Using that as leverage.
It really is. Sources suggest this is one of your biggest potential negotiating tools. If you always pay on time, you keep the place clean, you haven't caused any problems, you've been a good, quiet resident, gently remind the landlord of this.
Because it costs them money to find someone new.
Exactly. Landlords generally value reliable tenants because finding a new one involves advertising costs, potential vacancies where they get no rent, cleaning, repairs, screening applicants. It's a hassle and an expense. Highlight that you are a tenant worth keeping at a reasonable rate.
Makes sense. What about a hardship letter? I saw that mentioned.
Yes, another suggestion is to consider writing a hardship letter. This is a more formal letter explaining your current financial situation, maybe a job change, medical bills, whatever the reason, and explaining how the proposed rent increase would pose a significant burden for you right now. It adds a human element and creates a written record of your request. And again, mention your positive tenant history in this letter.
Okay. Are there compromises you could offer?
Yeah, think about compromises. Could you offer something the landlord might value in exchange for maybe a smaller increase, or even maintaining the current rate? The most common suggestion is offering to sign a longer lease.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, say you're currently month to month or your 1-year lease is ending. Offering to sign a new 1-year or maybe even a 2-year lease provides the landlord with guaranteed stability and predictable income for a longer period. That can sometimes be a very strong negotiating point.
The language learner sources also provide some specific phrases for negotiation, not just for increase, but even when you're first applying for a place.
Like what?
Like asking directly, is the price negotiable? Or suggesting alternatives based on commitment. Would the landlord accept less rent if I sign a longer lease? They even suggest strategic points like mentioning needed repairs that you noticed during the viewing to maybe justify a slightly lower initial rent, or offering to pay several months up front for a discount. I can offer to pay 6 months up front. Would you consider a discount for that?
Those show you're actively thinking and engaging in the process, which can be good. Now, what about the really difficult situation of paying rent late? Our sources cover the language needed for this too, from both sides.
Right. For the tenant, the first and most important step seems to be communication. Ideally, before the rent is actually due, or immediately after if there's an unavoidable delay. You need to apologize for paying late
Definitely start with an apology.
and clearly explain the reason why you were delayed. Maybe it was an unexpected medical bill or you had a temporary job loss, something concrete. Then politely ask if you can pay in a few days, and crucially, promise to pay on time next month. It's really about being proactive and transparent, not just hoping they won't notice.
Exactly. And from the landlord's perspective, their response, while maybe understanding, they might say, I understand you're having difficulties, must also clearly state the reality that rent must be paid. They might agree to a short delay, like, okay, I can give you 3 extra days, but they will likely also state that a $25 late fee will be added as per the lease.
Right, sticking to the contract.
Yes. If it's becoming a recurring issue, they might need to give a more serious warning. Please understand that repeated late payments may require you to move out, and they will almost certainly ask for a firm commitment. When exactly will you be able to pay the full amount?
These scenarios really highlight that clear, calm communication, even when things are difficult or awkward, is absolutely vital. We also saw this reinforced in those real-world online discussions about rent increases that we looked at.
Yeah, those discussions, while sometimes, expressing frustration, really demonstrated how important it is for tenants to know their rights and the correct process in their specific location. Key terms that kept coming up were the importance of receiving formal written notice for any rent increase. You can just get a text message usually.
Needs to be official.
Right. People discussed required notice periods, like 60 days notice being common in some areas before an increase takes effect, and also rules around how often rent can actually be increased. Sometimes it's legally only allowed once every 12 months.
And those discussions really made it clear that these rules about notice and frequency can vary significantly depending on where you live, your city, your state, or your country.
Hugely variable. Yeah.
The discussions also pointed tenants towards helpful resources if they had questions about their rights or the correct procedures, mentioning things like checking with consumer affairs departments or contacting a local tenants union or similar advocacy group.
It absolutely reinforces the idea that knowing the rules of the game, so to speak, and having the language to understand them and discuss them is genuinely empowering. It allows you to engage effectively, even in challenging situations.
So we've really covered a lot of ground here in this deep dive. Everything from those initial questions when you're first searching for a place and asking about the details, to handling common problems like repairs or neighbor issues, breaking down that complex but crucial lease agreement clause by clause.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, tackling the sensitive topic of discussing and negotiating rent, including those tricky rent increases.
And mastering this language, whether it's asking clearly about included utilities during a viewing, politely but firmly requesting a necessary repair, understanding the real implications of an early termination clause in your lease, or strategically discussing a rent increase with your landlord, it truly builds confidence.
It does.
It helps you feel more in control and just able to effectively navigate what is, let's face it, a really significant part of your life.
It's not just learning vocabulary lists. It's about understanding the practical steps involved, the legal framework that's often captured in documents like the lease, and maybe even the strategy behind conversations like negotiation.
And that brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. How does knowing not just what to say, but why certain language and procedures are used in the rental world, things like formal written notice requirements, or understanding how late fees work, or the purpose of a security deposit, how does that deeper understanding empower you beyond just avoiding basic mistakes? Think about how it allows you to advocate for yourself more effectively and participate more fully and confidently in your living situation.
A really powerful point to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into English, for talking about housing and rent.